Hello, freelancer. I'm happy to see you for another week. Today, I'm sharing a phrase we hear daily at Ren. That client didn't ask me for an invoice. The invoice isn't for your client, it's for you. The invoice is the document you use to declare that you've earned that money. Always keep this in mind. If that money entered your account and there's no invoice behind it, that money and those euros exist in your account, but they don't exist in your accounting. And that's what matters says. That's exactly the difference the tax agency is looking for. Today, I'll explain 3 things. First, what an invoice must include to be valid. Second, when to include VAT and when not to, depending on where your client is. And the explanation and the reason why when you invoice a Spanish company, you receive less money than what you put on the invoice. That last part is what causes the most confusion, so we'll do it with a practical example and real numbers. So let's get started. Let's go. The first thing that must be clear, every euro you earn is declared, and the invoice is the vehicle to make it feasible. This is where those who work with platforms like Upwork or Fiverr, which don't ask you for invoices, usually fail. You go in, do the work, get paid, and the platform takes care of its part. And this is where the mistake happens. If you get paid through these platforms, you still have to issue your invoices, one a month with the total of what you've invoiced with that platform. No one is going to ask you for it. You generate it, save it, and it's already declared. And this also happens with that small client you work with who says, "Don't worry, no invoice needed." You actually do need it. You need it for yourself. Maybe he doesn't, but you do. Let's look at the anatomy of those invoices. There are 8 blocks in total. First, invoice number, which we'll talk about in detail now. 2, date of issue. 3, your details. Name, tax ID, and address. Always those 3 details. 4, the client's details. It's the same data as yours, but adjusted to the country where they are. For example, a Spanish client has their tax ID number, a German client has their intra-community VAT number, and one from the United States has their fiscal name and address. 5, description of the service or product. It must be a specific description. Professional services isn't enough. Instead, for example, brand identity design in January 2026. 6, the taxable base, the amount before taxes. 7, VAT if applicable. This is where the map we'll see in a few minutes comes in. Don't get ahead of yourselves. And 8, the total to be paid, which is the taxable base plus VAT. All this data is mandatory, and if any of it is missing, the invoice is contestable. And when it's contestable, it's no use to you for declaring it or to your client for deducting it. Let's move on to numbering. This point seems administrative, but it's the one that causes the most problems in the long run. The numbering always goes up, never down, and never repeats. Let me explain. If you issue invoice 01 today, tomorrow it'll be 02, and the next day 03. You can't issue invoice 02 on a Monday and 01 on a Tuesday. The rule of thumb is, let the invoice numbers run on their own. Issue them in chronological order. Let's move on to VAT, the 3-zone MAC. Everyone searches on Google, when do I add VAT? But this depends on 2 questions. Where is your client located? And are they a company or an individual? Imagine a map with 3 zones, Spain, inside the European Union, and outside of Europe. Let's go to Zone 1, Spain. Any invoice here includes a VAT of 21% without exception. In Zone 2, outside of Europe, no invoice includes VAT. It's always the taxable base and the total without including VAT. And let's go to Zone 3, inside the European Union but outside of Spain. Here it's separated depending on the client. If it's a company and you're both registered in VIES, meaning you both have an intra-community VAT number, no VAT is charged, not by you or by them. On the other hand, if it's an individual, VAT is indeed charged. Pay attention to the condition for this last though. Both parties must have an intra-community VAT number. Having a Spanish freelancer tax ID is not the same as having an inter-community VAT number. It's a separate registration that you have to request. I'll tell you what happens if you don't have it. Imagine the scenario. You invoice a company in Berlin without VAT because you've heard that between European companies, well, it's not needed. The problem is that you're not registered. You don't have that intra-community VAT number. So that invoice is incorrectly issued and the problem is yours, not the agency's in Berlin. So if you're going to start invoicing clients in the European Union, register, get your intra-community VAT number, and always ask for your clients. It's a procedure that must be done before invoicing. Let's move on to IRPF. I'm going to explain what's most frequently asked at Ren. If you invoice a Spanish company or a Spanish client, you have to apply IRPF, which is 15%. Since it's a withholding, it means that percentage is subtracted from the total of the invoice. In other words, the client isn't paying it to you, they pay it to the tax agency on your behalf. That 15% doesn't reach you because it goes to the tax agency. And for new freelancers, there's a reduced version. During the year you register and the following 2, you can apply 7% instead of 15% if you want. But this is optional, so you choose. Watch out, because this applies to Spanish companies and freelancers. If your client is a Spanish individual or is outside of Spain, this withholding doesn't apply. It's a mechanism between professionals within the Spanish system. As I said before, let's look at it with a real invoice. You invoice 1,000 euros to a Spanish company. The taxable base is those 1,000 euros, which would be your work and what you've charged for it. Add the VAT, 21% of those 1,000 euros. Add 210 euros more, minus the IRPF withholding, 15% less, minus 150 euros. Total invoice, 1,060 euros. This is the amount the company is going to transfer to you. And now the usual question, have I lost 150 euros? No. Those 150 euros have been paid by the company to the tax agency in your name. It's your money already paid toward this year's taxes. When the fiscal year ends and your income tax is calculated, all those withholdings that have been paid for you don't have to be paid again. They're just subtracted. It's an advance, not a cost. Think of it this way. Your clients have been advancing the income tax you'll owe at the end of the year, and instead of paying it all at once, they pay it for you bit by bit. If throughout the year they've withheld more than you owed, then you'll get a refund. That's why freelancers with many corporate clients end the year with a tax refund. It's not luck, it's because they've paid more than they were supposed to. Let's go over the most common mistakes. 4 things that we see time and time again. First, not invoicing what you earn through platforms. Issue your monthly invoice even if nobody asks for it. Second, manual numbering. Repeated numbers, gaps, series. Stop. Let a system handle the counter. Third, invoicing the European Union without being registered. Remember to register to get your intra-community VAT number and ask for your client's number. And fourth, not providing concise descriptions. Miscellaneous services doesn't count. These are all rules you must remember every time you make an invoice, unless you have a system that does it automatically. And after all this explanation, I'll summarize it in 4 phases. Every income needs its invoice, whether they ask for it or not. VAT depends on where your client is and if they're a company or an individual. Income tax withholding only appears when you invoice Spanish companies or freelancers. And remember that withholding isn't money you lose, it's money you've already paid. And that's it for today's video. If you have any questions, you can ask us everything in the comments and subscribe and like to stay up to date on everything you need to know if you've just registered as a freelancer.